I am Robert M. Stivers, Jr., and I'm here at Knoxville, Tennessee on October 28, 2005. Have the pleasure of interviewing G. Wilson Horde. This interview is being conducted and taking place as a part of the Legal History Project of the Tennessee Bar Foundation. Wilson, first I want to thank you for the opportunity to let me participate in your interview, and thank you for being willing to be interviewed. Now, would you please tell us what the G in the mysterious G. Wilson Horde stands for? What's your full name?
Gaither Wilson Horde, Jr.
And when and where were you born?
Fresno, California,
And
1926.
And I happen to know that you are 79 years old and you've been licensed to practice law and practicing law in Tennessee for 53 years, up to and including today. And since we're friends and longtime colleagues, I also know that you work a minimum of 5 days a week right now after 53 years at the bar. What's your motivation for a full-time practice still after 53 years?
Well, I guess number one, it's challenging, and every day there's something new that occurs, and that's part of the excitement of law practice. And the word practice pretty well describes it. You learn something new every day, and I really and thoroughly enjoy it.
Excellent. Who are your parents?
I'm a junior, so my father was a senior, and my mother was Maureen Horde from, both of them were from Western Kentucky.
And you are married to Jackie Horde, and y'all very recently celebrated your 50th wedding anniversary, correct?
True.
And y'all have children.
Have 5.
And what are their names, and what professional activities do they follow?
Well, the oldest is Leslie Horde, and she is an attorney and married to an attorney living in the Atlanta, Georgia area. Both of them are practicing. My son, who is the third, nicknamed Rocky, is also an attorney, graduated from Vanderbilt, I might add. My oldest daughter, graduated from Mercer down in Georgia. My son is in the Atlanta area, also practicing. I have a daughter, Kelly Horde, who is a business person or manager for the Emerald restaurant there in Georgia. The famous TV chef has a restaurant there, and she's their business manager. I mentioned Kelly. Karen, who is next, is married, is a homemaker, and has a couple of children. And then last, my youngest, Laura, is married and lives in Palm Springs, California. She's working now, but I'm not, with a real estate company out in Palm Springs.
A minute ago, you mentioned that you were born in California and your parents are from Kentucky. How did you end up being born in California, of all places?
Well, in those days, I guess the expression "go west" meant a lot to people, and so my father and my mother thought that going west was the thing to do, so they went to California on their honeymoon, and they stayed for about 3 years, I think, and that's where I was born.
And did they move directly back to Nashville?
No, they moved to Western Kentucky for a short period of time, like a few months, and then came to Nashville.
Okay. And you basically grew up in Nashville, correct?
Yes. Stayed there, elementary, high school, college, law school.
Okay. What community did you live in most of the time in Nashville?
somewhere between Inglewood and Madison. I went to high school at Isaac Litton, and it was neither in Inglewood and was neither in Madison, somewhere in between. We called it Gallatin Road section and a few other names. But
what elementary school did you go to?
I started out at a school called Jerry Baxter, and when they built a new school that was closer to my home, that was Dan Mills.
And you said you went to Isaac Litton for high school?
Isaac Litton High School.
What about junior high or middle school?
That wasn't known in those days. Elementary school was through the 8th grade, and when you went to high school, you started in the 9th.
And when did you graduate from high school?
1944.
And, of course, World War II was at its height at that time. Did you enlist in the military?
Yes, I volunteered for the Navy and left within a few days after I graduated from high school.
And what was your rate or rank at discharge from the Navy?
It was a rate, all right, because I went in as an apprentice seaman and came out as a boatswain's mate 3rd class, which is sort of it's equivalent to a sergeant in the Army, non-commissioned officer type.
Why did you select the Navy?
Well, a lot of my classmates were going into the Navy. I had taken the naval air training or Air Corps test and passed it, but I got to looking at how long you stayed in school, looking at that information, and I realized that I would miss the war, and I didn't think I would miss, I thought I would, and I wouldn't be able to tell my grandchildren or children that I was in World War II, so I started volunteering for everything that came up and wound up spending 3 months in boot camp in the Navy and the remainder of the 2 years in the Pacific.
And basically, what was your job in the Navy? What did you do?
A seaman does everything on a ship that the officers don't want to do. And, you do everything from cleaning the decks to taking care of the weapons. You spend a lot of time pulling in lines when you dock, tightening lines, standing watch. I self-appointed myself to be a radioman so that I could stand watch on the radio instead of carrying a carbine, standing around on the deck watching for somebody that may or may not try to climb aboard improperly. So I did a lot of radio work.
Thinking back to the time that you spent in the military, what was the most memorable campaign or experience that you were part of during your time in the military service?
Well, I got in on the tail end of the Saipan invasion, but essentially that was secured, but made the initial landings on the island of Iwo Jima. I was on an amphibious landing craft and was assigned to the 5th Marines. So whatever the Marines told us to do, that's what we did. And we brought in from the larger ships. Iwo had no docks then. They still have no docks because of the condition of the sand and the rough water around the island. So everything that came in, the Marines, all of the supplies, medical, food, ammunition. Of course, initially it was ammunition and men that we took in. And then later we began carrying out the wounded to the hospital ships anchored nearby, and in some instances, some Japanese prisoners.
While you were on Iwo Jima, I want you to tell us about an experience that you had on getting a brief tour of Mount Suribachi.
Well, Mount Suribachi is not truly a mountain as we know mountains. It's about 560 feet high, but it rose abruptly from a very level portion of the island. The whole island is is just a few feet above sea level, and so this 550 or 60 feet made it look like a, quote, mountain, about the size of Stone Mountain in Georgia, if you're familiar with that. The Marines raised the flag on Mount Suribachi on D+4. And so one day, 2 or 3 days later, maybe 4 days, we were secured on the beach, and the Marines were unloading by hand all of the ammunition that we had brought in. It's small arms ammunition, 50 caliber, 45 caliber for, and 30 caliber for their carbines. And so that all had to be unloaded by hand, and we had a few hundred tons of that on the ships, on the boat. We called it a boat. And so while we were there, and it was about mid-morning, 3 of us decided that we wanted to go up and see what the mountain looked like from the top, plus the fact that the Marines were still fighting about halfway up the island. The island is about 5 miles long and about 2 miles wide at its widest point. So we decided we wanted to go up and have a bird's eye view of what was going on in the fighting. So 3 of us climbed that mountain, and when we got to the top, there was a patrol of Marines there, young Marines, of course. I guess they looked like some of them about my age, but they knew a lot more about what they were doing, of course, than I did. I'd say 19 to 20, 21, maybe 22 years of age. And when we got up there, one of the guys, I noticed particularly that he was a private first class. He had 1 stripe on his sleeve, carrying carbine. Of course, I was carrying a carbine too. But the first thing he asked is, because one of the guys that was with us was an ensign. He had on the Navy khakis with his officer's cap. I had on the work clothes for enlisted men, which was blue jeans, or blue dungarees they called them then, and a blue Navy shirt with a white sailor's cap. And so did the other guy who was with us. He was an enlisted person. And so the private first class immediately asked me, who are you guys? And so I told him, I said, well, we're Navy personnel. We're on the amphibious craft, and I pointed down the side of the mountain to where you could see where we were on the boat was tied up on the beach there. And the next thing he said was, what in the hell are you guys doing up here? And I fell into it, I guess, and I said, well, we just want to come up and look around. And he, using a lot of profanity, he said, don't you realize that there are Japs all over this place, Japanese, and that they're popping out of these caves constantly, and that you can get your, a nice word is derriere, but he called it something else, shot off up here? And I said, well, I never thought that much about it. And he said, well, you'd better. And he said, get the GD down off this mountain right now. And so we didn't argue with him. We figured he knew what he was talking about, so we left. We started down the mountain, and we'd gone about 20 or 30 feet, and he said, and one more thing, take off that GD sailor's cap, that white thing I had on my head. He realized, of course, that I was a target, and I hadn't thought that much about it. I really thought the mountain had been secured because the flag was on the top. The flag was on the top, but there were still, the mountain was honeycombed, as they found out later and knew then, with caves, tunnels dug by the Japanese, quite ingenious cave system in that mountain, and it took them a long time to get them all out of there. So I had an interesting experience by a private first class telling me and an ensign what to do.
And you followed reasonable instructions?
Oh, immediately. And we didn't go back for several weeks after that.
Now, have you had the opportunity to go back to Iwo Jima since the end of the war?
I went back in 2002 and again this year in March of 2005. The Japanese have it as a military base. The United States turned it back over to the Japanese as part of their homeland. It was the first island that was considered part of their homeland, so that it was very precious to them as being part of their homeland. And so the Marines, because of the treaty, that as a result of the treaty, the Marines can do exercises there for 1 week a year, as I understand it. They do amphibious landing, and the Marine pilots shoot landings on the now airfield. And 1 day a year, from about 7 in the morning till 7 in the evening, a tour that has former veterans and other people that want to go can come on the island. The last tour, there were about 400 and something people, 83 veterans that actually participated in the invasion. But the rest of them are people who just historians, media crew, dignitaries. They have a memorial service around 12 o'clock, and the people, survivors of the Japanese side of the war are on that particular island. Some of them return, and some of their relatives return. They have a couple of, maybe 3 temples there, the Japanese do, on the northern part of the island. So they come and hold services there, and then we hold a memorial service for everybody, and dignitaries speak and so forth for about an hour. And the rest of the time we're able to go around the island and visit some of the places we're familiar with.
When on your trips back to the island, what kind of feelings does that return to that area evoke in you?
Well, I had some of the same feelings that the rest of them do. Of course, I don't hold a grudge against, I guess you'd say, today's generation of the Japanese people, and you finally forget it, I guess, but it wasn't something you forgot easily. And we received instructions not to speak begrudgingly to any of the Japanese people that were visiting that day, and we didn't. One fellow was still pretty well upset, so they kept him sort of in the background. But I had an occasion to speak to a Japanese infantryman that was there, and he spoke English. And so it was interesting to talk to him. Now, he and I had obviously never faced each other, but I enjoyed talking to him. And so, but it's very emotional. You realize how many, the Marines lost more of their men there than any other island invasion, and it's still an icon in the Marine history that you learn if you join the Marines. They are schooled well on that, on the Battle of that island. In fact, all of them can tell you about where and how many Marines received the Medal of Honor. More Medal of Honor were given at that particular invasion than any others in the whole during war. So it was quite an event, and I felt privileged and thankful that I participated and survived.
After you left military service, did you come back to Nashville to live?
Yes, I returned to Nashville and tried to get into Vanderbilt, but back then, that was 1946, and there's so many veterans that were returning that had the GI Bill for educational purposes, and that Vanderbilt was full. So I went across the street to Peabody College, and they were full, but they had so many that wanted to go to school that they started night classes. And as it turned out, I enrolled in a night class, but some student had a day job, and so he wanted to go at night, so I switched with him. And then during the first year or two, I started taking classes back then Peabody and Vanderbilt were not one as they are now, and you could take classes at either university. So I took classes at Vanderbilt and at Peabody, and then after 3 years, switched to law school.
What made you decide you were interested in going to law school or interested in the practice of law?
Well, it just so happened that one of the sons of one of the more prominent attorneys, probably one of the most prominent attorneys around Nashville, was going to Peabody with me. And
who was that?
The lawyer was Jack Norman Sr. His son was Jack Norman Jr.
Okay.
And he and I, and we're still friends today. In fact, he was in my wedding when I got married. But he and Jack Norman Jr. and myself used to go down and watch his father try cases. And so that really turned me on. I just knew that I would be as good as Jack Norman Sr. or better. Of course, I didn't turn out that well, but that did give me an inspiration, and he was a very outstanding trial attorney, both criminal and civil, and very active in civic and political affairs there in Nashville. So that started me.
And did you, I think you told us a moment ago that you left Peabody at the end of 3 years and enrolled in Vanderbilt Law School. Did you ever get a degree, an undergraduate degree from Peabody?
No, I understood then that I could, but I didn't think it was that necessary, because then with 3 years undergraduate you could go into law school. Nobody ever heard of an LSAT back then. If you had decent grades and could pay the tuition, you got in law school.
And did you mean to tell us that applied to Vanderbilt?
It sure did.
It may be an obvious question, but what made you decide to choose Vanderbilt Law School as opposed to some other law school?
Well, of course, it was very close. I lived in walking distance of this university, so that made it convenient. Plus the fact that I could get in, and there were several other students that I knew that were going to go there. Jack Jr. decided he was going to go to what was then called the YMCA Night Law School. His father thought that they didn't teach real law at Vanderbilt anymore, although Jack Norman Sr. graduated from Vanderbilt. He felt they didn't teach law anymore, so he suggested his son go to the night law school, which he did. And Junior's become a very prominent attorney. And his brother Seth Norman is a criminal judge there in Nashville. So life takes turns, and that was one of them.
Now, when did you graduate from law school?
1951.
Now, and you started in 48?
48, yeah. Started Peabody in 46. I went straight through summers and so forth to get the necessary credits. I was majoring in math, chemistry, and I had a major in English that I could have, I guess, gotten either one. Sciences, chemistry and physics. I thought at one time I was going to be an aeronautical engineer, but after seeing Mr. Norman try those cases, I dropped that right fast.
Now, tell us about some of the people that were your contemporaries at Vanderbilt Law School, that were either in your class or right around your class that some of us may have heard of.
Yeah, one of them that to me was not only a good friend of mine, but very outstanding graduate, and became later on the Tennessee Supreme Court, was William Harbison, Bill Harbison. He graduated 1 year before I did, but he and I were close friends and remain close friends. Allen High is a chancellor and was a chancellor before he retired there in Nashville. Hewitt Tomlin was the Court of Appeals in Western Tennessee. One of our graduates, Charlie Spear, played football, and somebody said, well, what did he do was so outstanding? Well, he gave, back in the days when $1 million was a lot of money, he gave $1 million to the law school. And he was a very successful practitioner down in Birmingham. Jimmy Martin became a criminal judge in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Doug Henry, we called him Duck, Senator Duck Henry, state senator. He was in my class. George Cate was vice mayor of Nashville. Dave Rutherford was wound up being, I think, clerk of the courts over there in Nashville, as I remember. I know his whole family was very active in politics for years. One of my good friends was Jerry Colley down in Columbia, Tennessee, and he's been interviewed, and he's an outstanding counsel. At one time did a lot of criminal work, but now I think he's sort of like some of us. He's not quite as active as he used to be. I think his son does most of the practice now. But those are just some of them. I had some outstanding professors at the law school, which left a real impression on me. John Wade, who most of us know, wrote the Prosser on torts. It became Prosser and Wade on torts. He wrote the new volumes on that. A very outstanding professor in the field of torts. Eddie Morgan was a professor of criminal law. He wrote everything there was to know about evidence in criminal law at that time. And Dean Ferson, F-E-R-S-O-N, Ferson was in the restatement of contracts. We had an outstanding faculty back then, those that students could look up to with pride.
What would you guess was the approximate size, student-wise, of your class at Vanderbilt Law School, say at graduation?
Oh, at graduation, it was about 120. When it started, it was close to 150. We were the last big veterans class in there, and the school had at that time somewhere between 350 and 400 students for all of the three classes.
When you graduated from law school, you obviously took and passed the bar, correct?
Yes.
And where did you begin your practice of the law?
Well, I made a decision which wasn't too difficult to make. When I started looking around Nashville, the only thing that I could get was a position with a law firm which is no longer in existence, and it paid $150 a month. Well, I had some debts from law school, and I could be a claims representative with State Farm Insurance Company for $340 a month and a car. So it didn't take long for me to make that decision. So I stayed with State Farm for 21 or 22 months, and I was dabbling in the practice of law on the side, which State Farm didn't care for. So then I joined an independent adjusting company and was still dabbling in the practice of law, and they opened up an office here in Knoxville, which I was to head up and did. And when I got up here, I was still practicing, dabbling in the practice of law, and the gentleman who owned the company called me one day and said, make up your mind. You're either going to practice law or you're going to, be counsel for this company and represent the insurance companies and more or less work for me. And I said, I think I'll go out on my own. So I did.
Now, thinking about the time that you spent working in the claims administration end of the insurance business, both in Nashville and in Knoxville for just a moment, was it common then for the people who handled insurance claims, injury claims on the front line, the people who did the interviews, investigated the claims and adjusted the claims, to actually be lawyers?
In some instances, yes, but very few. Most of the time they turn them over to their local council, whatever city the accident may have occurred in. But in some instances, I had the opportunity to, Hank Williams and his wife lived just south of Nashville, and his wife had an accident driving one of their Cadillacs, and so I went out to interview her, and after interviewing her, may I tell you about something that happened at the house?
Please.
Oh, it was interesting. I interviewed her in the den of the home, which would, by today's standards, would be a modest home out there on Franklin Road. And it was still, upscale, but not a huge home. I interviewed her in the den of the home, which was paneled. And as I was talking to her, I noticed around on the wall various gold and what looked like to me silver records. The old 33 and a third records that had the hole in the middle that played on the record player. And I asked her what those represented, because I'd never seen gold or what turned out to be platinum. And those were records that companies had given him, Hank Williams, for selling 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000 records, whatever the goal was at that time. And I couldn't help but notice something that valuable, at least that valuable to me, in recognition of such an honor, was stuck up on the wall with an ordinary thumbtack. I couldn't get over that. I didn't say anything to Miss Williams about it, but when I walked out of there, I shook my head and I thought, I just can't believe that.
Well, during the time that you were in Nashville, and as you've referred to it, dabbling, whether State Farm was aware of the dabbling or not, did you also have occasion to represent other clients that we might recognize their names?
Well, when I got to, I formed a relationship with several of the lawyers there in Nashville, and when I came to Knoxville, another notable person that was interesting was Don Gibson, the fellow who wrote I Can't Stop Loving You and Oh Lonesome Me, which have become standards in the world of country music. And he was going through a divorce, a very messy one, I might add, child custody problem. And so I represented him here in Knoxville.
Now, you told us that you physically left Nashville and came to Knoxville at the behest of the independent insurance claims company. When you came over to Knoxville, did you intend to stay in Knoxville and practice here?
No, I thought I'd stay over here maybe 3 or 4 years and then go back to Nashville. But I'm still here.
And
I came over in 1956, and here I am.
After the discussion you mentioned a few minutes ago with the owner of the independent claims company about either practice law or work for him, and you decided to go into the practice of law, with whom did you practice here in Knoxville?
Harold Stone.
And Harold is still practicing today,
He's still
correct?
practicing. It was Stone, Horde, and then it became Stone. Bozeman and Horde, Judge Bozeman being county judge at that time. And then later it was Stone, Bozeman, Horde, and Shields, Perry Shields, who later became a judge on the U.S. Tax Court in Washington, D.C. He's deceased now, but an outstanding mind. I was very, very privileged to be associated with him.
And Judge Bozeman, who served as county judge for a number of years here in Knoxville, or Knox County, of course, is still alive, correct?
Yes, he's still alive. So certainly, so is Harold.
Mm-hmm. And they are. Do you still stay in contact with them?
Oh yes, in bar activities and so forth. I see them frequently.
Basically, what kind of work did the firm do, and did you do when you began practicing in Knoxville?
Well, when I was doing full-time practice, anything that walked in. Small criminal cases, or I was appointed as Judge Bibb sat on the criminal court here, and he would appoint me as criminal defense counsel. You didn't get paid anything, but you got good experience. And divorces, title searches, torts, automobile, as a result of negligence and automobile accidents. So anything that came in that I felt I could do, I did.
Now, how long did you stay in private practice at that time?
Well, I stayed in private practice from about 56, a little latter part of 56 until 1963, and I became an assistant U.S. attorney in the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Knoxville and stayed 4 years until 1967.
When you were in the United States Attorney's Office, what type of cases did you generally handle?
Well, in those days, there was no Speedy Justice Act, so we tried criminal cases twice a year, in July and December, just before Christmas. And it was just one right after another until you cleaned out everybody that was either in jail or had a case that were under bond and had out on bond, and had a case pending. Most of the docket back then was about, I would guess, 65–70% civil, and the remainder was criminal.
And what types of cases in the civil arena did you generally find yourself involved in?
Well, everything involved the United States. We defended. I defended a case involving the fellow who wound up sitting on the Court of Appeals here, Houston Goddard. He represented a bunch of landowners in the Great Smoky Park, and they had an action against the government, which I remember quite well. Every time any kind of an employee was involved in any kind of negligence, which involved maybe an injury to someone while they were in there carrying out their responsibilities, then we tried those cases. It just depended on what, of course, in the criminal area, a couple of them that come to my mind were income tax evasion cases, and I had the opportunity to try two of them that were represented by Clyde Key, one of our former, now deceased, excellent trial lawyers, and Ray Jenkins, who was counsel to the, I think, minority or maybe majority counsel during the hearings there, McCarthy hearings there in Washington. And I was very happy that in the case of Mr. Jenkins, because he's a very flamboyant, very moving speaker, particularly when the jury is involved, that I obtained conviction in both the cases that he represented the defendants in, he and Mr. Key. However, the compass turned 180 degrees later when Mr. Jenkins represented a fellow that had allegedly shot a bear in the Great Smoky Park, which was upset a lot of people. And I was prosecuting that gentleman, and Mr. Jenkins, he immediately made me regret that I had won the other two cases because he turned that one around and I lost that one.
During your work as Assistant United States Attorney, did you have occasion to do any work that might have led to your next type of practice of law with the Union Carbide Corporation?
One of the areas that I didn't mention was that, as you know, Knoxville is just a few miles from Oak Ridge, where three of the major sites for the then Atomic Energy Commission, which is now the Department of Energy, are located. And all of those sites were under one contract, and whenever the disgruntled person or an accident occurred, the AEC, or the Department of Energy, was named as a defendant. And so I had the occasion to defend those cases. Those were radiation exposure, toxic chemical exposure, that sort of thing. Those not covered by workers' comp. And so as one of the witnesses, we I had the occasion to use the then president of that Union Carbide division, and used him on more than one occasion. And one day in 1967, about January of '67, I got a call from him saying that he was looking for someone to head up the law department, that the gentleman who was in charge of the attorneys and other sections out there was retiring, and he'd like to have a, quote, real law department, and want to know if I would be interested in heading it up. And so I was flattered, and some 6, 7 months later, 8 months, matter of fact, I joined the company. I thought for a while I was going to go back into private practice, but that didn't work out, so I joined the company. Now,
Thinking about during your tenure as an assistant United States attorney and work you were doing for Union Carbide Corporation, as a member of the Knoxville Bar, I have been exposed to a story about a piece of demonstrative activity on your part in the course of a trial. And I'm going to take this opportunity, since you have nowhere to go, to ask you if it actually happened. I have heard over the years that you engaged in front of the jury in demonstrating that a particular product was in fact not harmful, contrary to the claims of the plaintiffs. Did something like that happen? And if it did, tell us about it.
Well, yes, it did. It involved a suit in which the plaintiff was claiming that he had suffered physical injuries, mental damage to his brain, because he'd been exposed to high levels of radiation emitting from depleted uranium. Well, depleted uranium is after the what's left over, the residue from the uranium ore that's been highly enriched. But the depleted uranium is not such that it bothers, that it should bother anyone. In fact, it had the sort of the nickname of green salt. In fact, in certain solid condition, it is green. And I had a vial of it in the courtroom with me, and it had been held up and used by witnesses as to what it looked like and what the properties were, and that it didn't represent that kind of risk to anyone. And so in my remarks to the jury, I took the top off of the container and moistened my finger, put it down into the salt, and put that in my mouth and swallowed it to show the jury that it wasn't dangerous. Upon reflection, and many years later, there are some scientists that say maybe I shouldn't have done that, but other than what my wife might say, that it affected my mind, I'm okay.
Who won?
Oh, we prevailed on that one, okay. The government.
You've touched on this a bit, but you went to work for the Union Carbide Corporation nuclear division, and you managed lawyers in more than one, well, I guess more than one state and more than one property, even inside the state of Tennessee. When you first went to work as division counsel, how many lawyers did you have on the staff?
I think there were 3, maybe 4.
And how long did you remain general counsel or lead attorney, or whatever the title was, for a contractor in Oak Ridge?
I stayed out there a total of 33 years.
Thinking about the 5 lawyers that you managed when you started out, then think about at the peak, lawyers and patent agents who also fell under your purview. How many do you think you had was the maximum that were there?
Somewhere, I think it was either 34 or 35.
And over the years you had...
But that was in multi-states now. We had
right.
Several states.
Both Tennessee, which you've described for us.
Kentucky, Ohio, and Florida.
Okay. And were all of those sites connected with contracts with the United States Department of Energy?
They were.
And did you have any information, any knowledge about toxic exposure, radiation, when you first started dealing with the defense of those cases when you were an assistant U.S. attorney?
No, but that site out there, or sites, there are 3 out in Oak Ridge. In those days, and I'm not saying they don't now, but in those days they had some very highly qualified PhDs, experts in the field, and they were willing to talk to lawyers about it, and so I learned a lot fast about number one, what's going on, and what the properties of the various elements are, and so forth.
If you will, I'd like to ask you to reflect on your private practice time versus your work as management counsel inside a major corporation.
Well, fortunately, the company let me dabble in some private practice while I was out there, so I still kept active in the various bar associations, Knoxville, Anderson County Bar, the Tennessee Bar, the American Bar. Got a chance to go before several times while I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office up in the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals in Cincinnati, and also when with Union Carbide. So I had a mixed area of practice, and I really enjoyed it. I made a point of, and while you're managing outside counsel, we used outside attorneys when I didn't have the capabilities in-house, like tax laws, for instance. Class actions, it would take many attorneys representative, like a team of 5 or 6, and class actions. And so I worked with them on a daily basis. We'd split up the witnesses. I would examine a witness. They took the lead, but I participated in every step of the way, and that's what a managing counsel ought to do.
What similarities and differences were you able to see between private practice as an attorney and working in-house as an attorney?
Well, one of the advantages of representing a company in-house is that you've got one client, and you don't have to be humorous. You don't have to worry about being paid, which in private practice sometimes you have to worry about, be concerned about that, because you have overhead and people that depend on you. But with a company, you've got one client, and that is the company. Many of the witnesses that will be used in a trial are employees of the company, and so they are readily available. And rather than having to go out and search them down, you call them and ask them to drop by your office, and if that was the thing to do at that time, or meet you in the field where the incident occurred. And they always cooperated, so that's very nice. It's similar in private practice, but not quite, because sometimes witnesses don't show up. If they do, they change their minds. They tell you one thing on the phone, and then when they're there in person, either for an interview or a discovery deposition, it's not unusual sometimes that a lawyer gets surprised about what's going to be said. But that, I can truthfully say that most of the time that never happened with a corporation. So,
did you find that it was an advantage to be readily made aware of events and injuries that occurred that might have an effect on your client's liability at the moment that they occurred, as opposed to a year later?
Yes, because you immediately either can conducted or ordered an investigation to be done by those that were capable of doing it to find out what happened. So you knew what happened immediately or didn't happen, why it happened, so forth. And so then if some litigation resulted from that, then I was prepared promptly, whereas the plaintiff's counsel sometimes didn't have quite that same resource.
Now, Union Carbide Corporation subsequently did not renew their efforts to keep the contract, and other companies came in and took the contract, including Lockheed Martin Energy Systems, and you retained the general counsel role, whatever the title might be, through that transition. A moment ago, you were telling us that you stayed active in the bar associations, and you mentioned the Knoxville Bar, and Anderson County Bar, and Tennessee Bar. Was it unusual for an in-house or government attorney, and I know this, you did this from the time you went out there straight on forward, from the 60s up till now, was it unusual for an in-house or government attorney to remain active in local bar associations?
Well, that may be the case in a lot of instances, but I made certain that number one, the lawyers, all of the staff were members of the Tennessee Bar. I made certain that they belonged to a local bar, either Anderson or Knox or both. I just thought that if you're going to be a lawyer, you need to, whether it doesn't make any difference what your area of practice is, or whether you're in-house or whether you're outside counsel, you need to support the bar. And so I made certain that not only did they participate, that they served on committees. I know one of my attorneys became president of the Anderson County Bar, and it just, if you're going to be in court trying cases with or against lawyers, you need to be with them in their activities in the bar. And I have believed that from day one and still do so.
One of the things that, and I guess it's because of the background of you, both yourself and myself, that I have a tendency to skip over, and we've been doing it today. We've talked about the contractors operating plants for the Department of Energy in Oak Ridge and in some other states. What thing or things were done or made, and are done and made, at those plants where, what were the products and what were the activities when you were serving as general counsel?
Most everybody has heard of the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, but it is a life sciences laboratory. Doesn't have anything to do with weapons, nuclear weapons, or anything like that. They do research on life sciences, and you name it, they do it. Medical, cancer, and so forth, as well as others. And the so-called splitting of atoms and so forth, that's very new. That's not new to them. They do that every day. And with the radioisotope, for years, the laboratory was the only source for the radioisotopes for medical research, and that were used in operations in hospitals, so forth. So that was one of their products. The site known as Y-12 is the nuclear weapons facility. I don't guess I have to explain what a nuclear weapon is. The last site, the third site out there, which is no longer in operation, was known as the Oak Ridge Gaseous Diffusion Plant, where the purpose there was to enrich uranium from the ore that came in up to a certain level, usually 2.5, 3, maybe 4%, where it was then shipped to Portsmouth, Ohio, to be raised to a higher level of enrichment for use in nuclear weapons, to power the Navy submarines, aircraft carriers, certain tugs and so forth. Certain ships in the Navy are powered by reactors, and that's what that's used for.
The fifth plant in the process during the time that you were general counsel was at Portsmouth, Ohio.
Well, there was a fourth one in Paducah, which was another enrichment facility. The one at Portsmouth, Ohio was the one that enriched from the plant in Oak Ridge and the plant in Paducah up to a higher level, as I indicated, weapons grade and to be used with naval reactors and so forth.
Wilson, thank you. I'm going to get a little more specific about some cases I wanted you to tell us about. But first, I think this would be an excellent time to take a break. Thank you. Wilson, as general counsel in Oak Ridge at the facilities in Oak Ridge, in both Tennessee and Kentucky and Ohio and in Florida, what types of legal specialties amongst the lawyers did you need to hire to fill your staff?
Well, when the president offered me the position and I took it, first thing I started doing was looking for lawyers that knew, trial lawyers that knew how to try cases, because we didn't have anyone on the staff that had actually done any significant amount of trial work. So I started hiring lawyers and calling those that I knew that did trial work, asking if they'd be interested in joining the staff. And then I called some of the local judges here, asking what lawyers that they thought might be good trial people, so we could, in litigation, so we could defend our client, the company. Of course, now you don't necessarily, one of the things that a good lawyer has to also keep in mind, you don't try every case that could be tried. If it should be settled, you settle it. On the other hand, if you know your client's right, then you're going to try it regardless of what the outcome might finally be. But you're going to try the case if the client is correct and the case should be, and your client's not guilty of the charges that are made. So that same thing applies with the corporation.
Amongst the members of your staff, most of us understand different types of trial lawyers and skills for trials and that kind of thing. But did you have lawyers on your staff who had nothing to do with the courtroom and never went close to the courthouse?
Oh, yes. Well, I have contract lawyers who negotiated and concluded contracts, because one of the main functions of a company that operates a government site is that so much of that work has to be contracted out to bring in products that you don't make in-house. And so those are conducted by attorneys that you might say office attorneys that do contract work. Patent work is another area, intellectual property, in other words. We had patent agents, we had patent attorneys. After Judge Taylor in 1974 decided that ruled that the environmental laws applied to the Department of Energy sites, which I might add was a big shock to the then Atomic Energy Commission, which is now Department of Energy. I suddenly found myself having to learn about environmental law, and I realized that there was so much that I didn't know about it that I needed to get some environmental lawyers. So I hired 3 environmental lawyers right fast here in Oak Ridge, and one in Paducah, another one up in Portsmouth, in addition to the lawyers we had there, and one in Florida. So you learn right fast about what specialties that you need that you don't have. We had lawyers who spent a great deal of their time trying workers' compensation cases. There was a time when workers' compensation cases were just sort of ho-hum, but in view of what the cases, what the law says about the benefits that they can receive, that can affect the bottom line of a corporation right fast, either if they're self-insured or whether they have to pay a company a premium for the protection. It can be very expensive, particularly in a large company where you have not just one or two people filing claims against the company. You've got many. So I kept trial lawyers very busy on the staff. And I also reminded them that I said, if you've become disgruntled and you don't like what you're doing with this company, or you want to move to another geographical area or something, and you decide you want to go back into private practice, then you will not lose any of your skills, and that you'll be able to go right back into the area from whence you came. So I had the pleasure of developing what I call an in-house law firm, which really was it was a joy to work with some of the people that I had, and which, by the way, you learn from people, and I certainly learned from some of the lawyers many of them that I had on the staff.
Do you still maintain active contact with the lawyers that used to work with you?
Oh yes, very much so. I still, when the company, Lockheed Martin, lost their last contract out there in November of 2000 out there, Oak Ridge, then I joined the law firm of Kramer Rayson and in Knoxville, and I still am fortunate enough to do some of the closeout work for the corporation in Kentucky and Ohio and here in Tennessee. So I have contact with them frequently. Just got back from attending a retirement from Bethesda, Maryland, which is the home office of the corporation, where I attended the retirement dinner for and ceremony for the senior vice president and general counsel, who was a very good friend of mine, and got to again see all of my acquaintances that I used to see, and I still have almost daily contact with many of them by telephone. And I keep up with the former lawyers that used to be out there, because many of them have gone on. One of them is counsel for Kent State University up in Ohio. Yeah. And I had to think a minute, about to say Indiana. I know another one is with a German pharmaceutical company up in New Jersey, one of their top lawyers. I look up, and Pat McNutt, who used to be on the staff, is now clerk of the U.S. District Court for Eastern District of Tennessee. Another one of my lawyers, Bob Stivers, is in private practice here in Knoxville. I could just go on because so many of them now have scattered throughout the nation. I've got one of my former lawyers is out in the other Washington State, who's general counsel for a company out there. And I've been very fortunate to keep up with them. It's sort of like having your own small alumni society.
And I suspect it's also like having your own large law firm.
Well, it was while I was there.
Now, who was responsible for, you've talked about the hiring of lawyers.
Yeah.
And I take it that was something you were responsible for as general counsel. Who was responsible for hiring all the support staff and the securing the services that you needed to run this law department? And who was in charge of the budgeting? Who handled all that kind of stuff?
Well, the budget was something that was near and dear to my heart, so I I handled that myself, because that meant that depending on the amount of money that was afforded, that I could split up among the people for raises and that sort of thing. The support staff, like paralegals and secretaries, I left that primarily to the attorney for whom that person was going to work with, or attorneys if there was more than one. But I had the final say, but I never turned down anybody that the lawyers said was a good one and we wanted to hire or get that person. And we hired both inside and outside support staff outside the company, as well as inside.
In order to have a job in the law department, any of the jobs in the law department when you were there, was a security clearance required?
Yes, because of the fact that we were involved in the Department of Energy's work, some of which was weapons production, which of course is top secret to the Department of Energy. That work is performed for and on behalf of the Department of Defense. So you had to have a Q, so-called Q clearance, Q like Queen, Q clearance for the Department of Energy work. And then in some instances, on top of that, you had to have what is known as a need-to-know basis. And so not every lawyer on the staff had a need to know. Some did, some didn't. In some instances, I didn't have a need to know myself, but some lawyers on my staff did, because they were working in that particular top secret area.
And if a candidate or a lawyer on your staff was either not able to get a Q clearance or was not able to maintain one, could they have the job?
No. Okay. No clearance, no position.
Focusing on you as an individual lawyer while you were working, we've talked about your general counsel role, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about the types of cases that you individually were responsible for the conduct of those cases while you were in Oak Ridge, and what do you view now with hindsight as the most important one, and maybe they could be the same, the most challenging one?
Well, I guess class actions were most challenging. We had one where several of the people who live up and down Wattsboro Lake filed a suit against the company for the pollution of Wattsboro Lake, alleging that mercury and in uranium and other radioactive elements were, not that mercury is radioactive, but uranium certainly is, and plutonium, were accidentally discharged into the Wattsboro Lake over a period of time. And that was a very challenging and interesting suit. It did not actually go to trial, but it was settled. One of the more interesting things that I was involved in that was not litigation or a case as such was when the Union of the Soviet Republic fell apart, and then the question was what was going to happen to the enriched uranium that the Soviet Republic had, what was going to happen to it. And so the State Department, working with the Department of Energy, negotiated with the Soviet Republic to obtain much of that highly enriched uranium. We're talking about weapons-grade uranium, that to keep some of the insurgents by name, you could think of Gaddafi and others over there that would like to put their hands on that enriched uranium to make even a low-level weapon. They call them dirty bombs now. But that was very interesting in negotiating the removal and transporting of that material from Soviet Russia back to the United States and hence to Oak Ridge, I found myself talking to people in Russia that I assume were lawyers. I don't know. I was talking to them on the phone, had an interpreter. But we had the State Department, the Secretary of Defense was involved, the Secretary of Energy was involved, and I had the occasion to be present with all of them. And on this side, I didn't go to Russia. We sent a team of employees from Oak Ridge to package the uranium, arranged to have it shipped back on military planes, and then brought finally to Oak Ridge. But that was a very interesting thing for me. It's the first time it had ever occurred. And since that time, we've had another shipment or two. One of them we had involved each.
But there have been other shipments that have come in.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Okay. Now, in the year 2000, you left Oak Ridge.
Yes.
And became of counsel with the law firm of Kramer Ration here in Knoxville.
Yes.
Correct? How was that transition from, if you will, in-house practice back to private practice? Was it difficult, or
No, it's very easy, because fortunately I brought some of the work with me, so that keeps me busy, and then I've been able to, even at my advanced age, to attract a few clients, and that makes it rewarding, and been able to bring some in for the firm, which I am not capable of doing, like wills and estates. I don't profess to be an estate attorney, but some of the work I've brought in, and medical malpractice matters, antitrust matters. So those three areas that I can talk about that have been farmed out here with other lawyers.
What's the primary focus of your practice right now?
Defense, primarily, defense work.
Okay. And who would you say are your major clients for whom you do that work at this point?
Well, Lockheed Martin, BWXT, which is one of the companies that's now a replacement contractor to Lockheed at Y-12. We do work, and I'm involved in some of it, for UT Battelle, which operates the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And so those are some of the major ones. I still represent a couple of others that we're about to wind up, so I don't guess it makes that much difference anymore.
Thinking back over your legal career, what individuals do you think have had the most influence on you as a professional, and why?
Well, certainly my professors did. I thought the world of Supreme Court Justice Bill Harbison. People who've had influence on me, W.I. Davis, who was a great circuit trial judge, Judge Robert L. Taylor was an influence in my life when I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office and afterward, because I still tried cases in his court. I guess those were some of the major ones. I have all, you have so many associates in the field that it almost every day when you have a contact with someone, they leave a part of them with you, and that's something to think about. So I've enjoyed my association with the bar and hope to continue it. I can talk about some other judges. Judge Boyce Martin, the former chief judge of the Sixth Circuit Court in Cincinnati. Presently, Judge Phillips here, Tom Phillips is sitting on the bench of U.S. District Court, Judge Jordan, Judge Jarvis, who's just been recently interviewed here, as I am being interviewed today. Those men are in a position to not only influence your life, but affect your life as you are before them in various matters. So, lawyers, Ed Rayson, of course, Jack Norman had a big influence on me, and he referred cases to me that were up in this area. So I felt privileged and flattered to have the opportunity to do some work with him.
Have you found it easy to continue or maintain friendships with judges?
Yes, I'm one of the things that particularly the state court, because many of them are peers of mine, although they say I'm much older. I like today, had lunch with 3 of the state court judges right from the courthouse right across the street here. And so I keep up my social relationship with them. It's not something that, people say if you're friends of the judge, a good lawyer knows the law, a great lawyer knows the judge. Well, I'm not sure that, that's a cliche that I don't think that much of. I've never had, in my opinion, I've never thought that my friendship with a judge affected what they did. I've had as many rule against me as rule for me, so I've never let that bother me. I'm past chairman of the life members of the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. That throws me in contact with lawyers throughout 4 states, Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio, and Michigan. So I try to stay as active as I can.
You've also been active in politics throughout your adult life, haven't you?
Yes, in the background.
Okay.
Committees, heading up campaigns, fundraising. Of course, being an assistant U.S. attorney, that was a political appointment, but that was Estes Kefauver and Albert Gore Sr. that recommended me to the then Attorney General, Bobby Kennedy.
And I happen to know, but I suspect our audience has picked up on the fact that you've been active in Democratic politics here in Knoxville, Tennessee, throughout that whole time.
Yes, I was active some in Nashville, but very active here on the Democratic side here in Knoxville. And I'm I'm one of not many, because this area is heavily Republican, and my adversarial relationship during the years of the elections have always been very interesting, and I enjoy it very much, particularly if I win.
Correct. That's the important thing. Playing the game is secondary. Think back over your political activities. What do you think was the most rewarding moment or event, and the least rewarding?
Well, I was a great fan and supporter of Albert Gore Sr., and I got started with him in 1958, again in 64, but he was defeated in 1970. That was a very sad moment for him. Senator Brock from Chattanooga, well, of course he ran against him, was the prevailing senator. I enjoyed it very much when Mr. Brock got beat in '76 by Jim Sasser, because Jim Sasser was very active in the Albert Gore campaign. I think he was a state campaign manager, or at least had a statewide title, and I was here in Knox County I co-chaired with Hugh Morgan, another attorney here in town. That was a very sad day for me in 1970, but in 1976 I enjoyed it when we got rid of Mr. Brock. I say that with a certain amount of humor. I don't mean to insinuate anything other than humor. One of the more satisfying things is, which I'm sure some people would maybe disagree with me, was when got Governor Ray Blanton elected to office in the state of Tennessee. However, and he made some of the best judicial appointments that we've ever had appointed to the court. For instance, Sissy Daughtry, who is now serving on the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. Mr. Blanton appointed her to a judicial seat over in Nashville at the time. He made many outstanding appointments in the judiciary. Joe Nigro here in Knoxville, for instance, was another one of his. It was a real treat at the beginning. Toward the end of his term, he decided that Mr. Blanton was very headstrong, and you couldn't, once he made up his mind, or thought he'd made up his mind, you couldn't change it. And so he got involved in some things he shouldn't have gotten involved in, and as sometimes people in power do. Next thing I know, he's out of office. But it was interesting for the first 2 or 3 years anyway.
Throughout your career, you have been a member, and you've mentioned some of these earlier, of local, state, and federal legal associations and legal groups. And I'm not going to ask you to name them because that's not fair to you, but I know that you have been and remain member of the Knoxville Bar.
Yes.
The Anderson County Bar.
Yes.
The Hamilton Burnett American Inn of Court.
Yes.
The Tennessee Bar Association, American Bar Association. As you mentioned earlier, you're a life member of the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. Mm-hmm. You're also a member of the Tennessee Bar Foundation,
yes.
Correct? Have you held positions with those organizations over the years?
Ordinarily committees, but not as chair. I'm a House of Delegate member for the Tennessee Bar, but ordinarily I work with heads of committees and not seeking to be an officer.
Now, and you held a title position, and you just told us a moment ago, and I'm afraid I've forgotten, with the Sixth Circuit.
That was chairman of the life members for some 3 or 4 years there. That I was chair of that organization.
I, for one, was unfamiliar with how one became a life member of the Sixth Circuit. How did that process work for you? How did you become a life member?
Initially, you had to be invited to attend the meeting, be a nominee by one of the federal judges. At the time that I was being selected, Judge Taylor had already committed himself to someone, so he called Judge Harry Phillips, who was sitting on the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals in Cincinnati, and Judge Phillips arranged to have me there as his delegate, and that's what started it. But you had to be asked to be, you had to be a delegate for 3 conferences, and then with the approval of the chief judge, you became a life member. Now that's been changed, but that's the way it started.
You have also served a term on the Board of Professional Responsibility for the state of Tennessee.
In fact, 2 terms. I was there for 6 years, 7 years, maybe, I've forgotten. And
what time period did you serve on the board?
I wish you hadn't asked me. It's been a while. But Judge Harbison was the chief judge at that time, and so I remember that. But it's been in the 70s, maybe early 76, maybe to 83 or 4.
And you, at one point, were you vice chairman?
I was vice chairman, yes.
Now, have you also been the recipient of honors from any of these organizations?
Well, yes. In 2000, I received the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals in collaboration with the American Inns of Court, the Professionalism Award, which is given once a year, and I was the second recipient of that. Judge Pierce Lively of Kentucky was the first one. I received the second one. And since that time, there have been a total of 5 that have received the award. So it's not awarded every year. It can be, but it has not been. So I felt very fortunate to get that recognition. It afforded me the opportunity to be recognized by the U.S. Supreme Court at a dinner, and I had my family there, and it was a great occasion for me. One of the greatest things honors that I thought I received was being a member of the Tennessee Bar Foundation. I had the occasion to check on this. There are some 17,389 lawyers registered to practice in Tennessee. If my numbers are correct, there are 590 that are members of the Tennessee Bar Foundation. That percentage figures out to be 3.3%. That, to me, is an honor of which very few people can talk about in Tennessee, very few lawyers. So I hold that out as one of my badges of honor. It just doesn't happen, and often. I can't remember when I was nominated, and it was somewhere about 20 years ago, I think. It's been a long time, but I've tried to attend every function that the foundation has scheduled, and it's been very rewarding to me.
Thinking for a moment about the Board of Professional Responsibility, how did you come to be selected for the board? How does a person...
The Tennessee Supreme Court selects you, and now which one of the Supreme Court justices, I don't know. There were 5 then. Of course, there's still 5 now. They're not the court's not comprised of the same ones. But I received a call from the then Chief Justice, asking me if I would agree to serve, and I thought maybe he was talking about serving on a panel, but he was talking about serving on the board, and of course I was overwhelmed and tickled to death to serve on the board. You get a chance to work with Lance Bracey and his organization in the Board of Professional Responsibility staff. And the Bar Association of Tennessee is very fortunate to have someone like Lance Bracey heading up that office. And I enjoyed my work with them. It's not easy voting for or against the disbarment proceeding against one of your fellow lawyers. And for those that I knew very well, intimately, as somebody might say, I stepped aside because I just wasn't going to bear that burden in my heart about trying to be accused of trying to disbar one of my fellow lawyers that I felt I knew real well. Now, those that I didn't know as well, that I felt distant, so then I could look at the facts without being biased one way or the other. But when you know somebody closely, it's hard to know which way to vote.
I'm going to ask you what has to be called one of the greater all-encompassing questions. You, as we've said several times, you've been practicing law for 53 years. What changes have you seen in the practice itself during that time, for better and worse? And what do you think's coming in the future for the practice of law?
Well, looking back, I think one of the worst things that happened was lawyer advertising. I've never quite understood that, and I don't do it myself. This law firm doesn't do it. List ourselves in the phone book, but that's all. Now, there are some people, law firms, and that's their thing, buy full pages in the yellow pages and so forth, and do TV advertisements, and I'm not, that just is not my way of thinking. So I don't think lawyer advertisement was a good thing to happen to the bar. I came in before the advent of discovery depositions. Motion practice was practically unheard of, except Foster Arnett used to take advantage of that. Very prominent former Tennessee member of the Tennessee, president of Tennessee Bar, a member of this organization, the Bar Foundation. I guess he was the avant-garde on motion practice. So, and of course, arbitration was only known in labor law. Unions arbitrated matters. Lawyers didn't do that, not as, in their cases. If they were labor lawyers, they did. Mediation, back then, the lawyers just got together themselves and either settled or didn't settle. Now mediation is part of life, and I think it's a good thing. I think it's very good. Any way you can save the client money and come to an amicable settlement, I think that's what justice is about. So those things I like.
What hardships or pitfalls do you think you've seen during your practice?
Hardships. When you start out, you don't make enough to support your family. That's not an easy thing to do. It's support an office and your family, and that makes it tough. Sometimes the hardships are dealing with some of your adversarial lawyers, who some of them are very adversarial, and that you sometimes find it hard to be what you call a gentleman anymore, or a gentle person. That's not a pleasant thing. You have to deal with clients sometimes that are not very, very amenable to having a civil attitude about things. So I don't know. It's law practice has its ups and downs. It has some very satisfying moments. Some of the most satisfying things in the world is when you get things worked out. I know for a long time I did adoptions, and what a wonderful thing it is to see a young child being adopted by a couple, and you know they've got the child has a future ahead of it, instead of having to be tossed around from one orphan home to another.
Is there anything that you can think of that you wish I had asked and that you would like to tell us?
Well, maybe I could tell you something. I'd like to recite maybe some of the cases that I've been involved in, which I thought were interesting, if I might.
Sure. Please.
One of them in private practice that happened that I guess sort of helped me get started was there was an automobile accident in which I was representing an insurance company, and thence the insured up here in one of the northern counties outside of Knoxville, and Judge W.I. Davis was the sitting judge. And I, of course, had interviewed clients. Back in those days, you didn't have discovery. You didn't know who was going to be showing up on the other side as a witness. You thought you did. and you tried to interview him, sometimes he wouldn't even talk to you because the lawyer on the other side told him, don't talk to that lawyer, you know. So anyway, came into the courtroom. And the courtroom's up on the second floor, and as I recall, I think it was Jacksboro, but I'm not certain. The courtroom was jammed with people, and I thought, there must be some other reason for these people to be here. I know they're not here to see me try a case, and you know, in the smaller out counties, you had court day once every quarter or something, and then everybody would come in and watch the lawyers do their thing, and it would be crowded, but this wasn't, quote, a court day. Well, as the case went on, I found out that there was hard feelings between the people that I represented and the people on the other side, and they had made certain that their friends and relatives had come to the court to see that justice was done. And I don't know whether, I assume they didn't come with any intent other than just being there, but who knows? Well, as it so happened, the jury ruled in favor of the client that I represented. And at that moment when the foreman read the result, the courtroom, most of the people there just stood up and clapped and cheered, and I'd never seen anything like that. And I looked up at Judge Davis, and he looked at me as, you know, he didn't know what was going on either. And within just a few seconds, a couple of big burly guys came up, picked me up, and carried me around the courtroom on their shoulders. And here I am thinking, what is going on here? And I'm still looking at Judge Davis, and he's, you know, he doesn't know either. Well, they let me down, but the whole thing was apparently some kind of a feud between the families. And I don't mean shooting feud, but, you know, cuss fights between them or something like that. And fortunately, after that, I didn't have much trouble getting cases out of that area. I had a lot of people come down and see me about whatever was bothering them. Another one that I tried before Judge Taylor involved Houston Goddard, who later became on the Court of Appeals here in Tennessee, and recently passed away. Well, the Corps of Engineers was building a road through the Smoky Park, or part of it. You'll have to help me. What's that road called? It's not Skyline Drive, but when you go between here and the, before you get into the park, there is a road that goes across the...
Is it the Blue Ridge Parkway?
Blue Ridge Parkway Road, thank you. Thank you. The Corps had, the contractor had just finished, that had a contract with the Corps, had finished their section of the road, which was some few miles. About a week after the government had accepted the road, there came a hellacious rainstorm. And believe it or not, one of the section of the road, just as they say, sloughed off the side of the mountain and came down into the valley. That valley is near what we call Blackberry Farms, a very exclusive resort. Now, it didn't hit the farm, but it hit a bunch of homes, close to a lot of homes around in that valley. These were homes that were owned by some of the people that lived there the year round, others who had a vacation home there. And it was a very peaceful area until this whole landslide came down the mountain, bringing dirt, rocks, boulders, trees, anything you could imagine. It got caught up in that. Well, that affected the streams up there, those little creeks that people had built their homes, you know, a gurgling, bubbling creek that people built their homes right next to, and so they became streams of muddy water and stayed that way for a long time. And Houston Goddard represented, in private practice, he was then, he represented those landowners, and they filed suit. And he came over and wanted X dollars. I've forgotten what he wanted now. It seemed to me 15, 16,000, which I thought was outrageous. And I think as the government counsel, I offered them about 10,000, and they wouldn't accept it. So we tried the case, and this was being tried before Judge Taylor. It was a non-jury case. And there was a spring, a big spring, that had, in my opinion, not been touched or affected at all by this landslide. But by the time Houston Goddard got through presenting his case, it was a tragedy. And he kept talking about that spring, and I thought, what on earth is, he kept bringing it out with his witnesses. Well, what I didn't know was Judge Taylor had a spring on his farm up in upper East Tennessee, way, 100 miles from here. But he knew the value of a spring. And Houston, every time he'd mention spring to one of his witnesses, would turn around and sort of smile at me at counsel table, and I thought, what on earth is going on? Well, I found out later, after the trial was over, Judge Taylor told me that he had a spring on his farm, and that it was a very valuable asset, and he knew the value of springs, and so he gave them exactly what they asked for, which was much more than I had offered. And I don't think Houston ever let me forget that. Another case I tried before Judge Taylor, a criminal case, involved a check kiting. The scheme is that you take a check and deposit it, write a check on the bank, and before it clears the bank, you write a check on another bank and bring it into the bank that you wrote the check on to cover your check, and you keep it going, a circle sort of thing, between 4 or 5 banks. And the banks back then transferred their checks from one bank to the other by mail, no electronic means then. So it had a float period of some 3 or 4 days. Well, somebody who knew what they were doing, and these people did, I thought, could cover that float and use that money to do whatever they wanted to do with it. And I had watched Jim Neal, famous counsel in Nashville, who was, by the way, counsel to one of the investigations in Washington, I think, with Ray Jenkins. No, that was Fred Thompson. Jim Neal was on another one. And so I went over to Jim Neal, was in the U.S. Attorney's office at that time. He was the U.S. Attorney in Nashville. So I went over and watched him try a portion of a case very similar to that and used the format that he had for exhibits. Well, I came back convinced that I was going to win my case. And I used similar exhibits. I used similar testimony. And I thought everything was going just fine, until Judge Taylor started his charge to the jury. Judge Taylor had a reputation sometimes of charging you either in or out of court. Well, that day, he took as someone would say in rural areas of Tennessee, he took a shine to the defendants. He liked them. They did present good appearances. There were about 4 of them involved, men and women, their wives. And he thought they were fine, upstanding citizens, contrary to what I thought I had proven. And so he kept, when he would charge the jury, he'd raise his hands up and say, now, members of the jury, in order to find these people guilty, you've got to find they had evil intent. Evil intent, I mind you, evil intent. Evil intent's not in the statute anywhere, and it's not in a charge, but judge put it in there. If he didn't use the words evil intent 5 times, he probably used them a dozen times. I turned around to the government agent person that was there with me, sitting at counsel table. I said, we've lost this case. And he said, he's whispering, you know why? I said, I'll tell you later. Well, we lost because the jury didn't believe they had evil intent. Judge Taylor was a great guy, and I learned a lot from him. Believe me, I did. He ran a strict court. He knew what he was doing. He was what I would consider a brilliant judge, but he could be very difficult to get along with if you came into his court, you weren't prepared, or you weren't competent. Now, while he would chew on you during the proceedings, sometime during the proceeding, he'd try to make it up and compliment you on something where it wouldn't look like that you were the lowest of low life in the area of intelligence, but he could be very difficult. And so if you could get in his court and out of his court without being scathed, you were sort of fortunate. I learned about that one time. When he started telling me using his hands, he was good at using his hands. He'd say, now, Mr. Horde, that's not what you're supposed to do, when I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office. You shouldn't be bringing this out. You should be, in this direction. And I'd patiently wait till he finished his tirade, and then I'd say, well, I certainly appreciate the court helping me try my case. And boy, did that... Now, Mr. Horde, that's not my intent. I am not here to help you try your case. You're responsible for the conduct of this case, not me. But he didn't help me anymore after that, so it got to him. But one more time, I had nothing but the highest admiration for Judge Taylor. He was like another father to me on many occasions.
Wilson, my final question to you is, of what accomplishment are you the most proud?
Well, I guess being able to stay with the practice the long period of time, then I hope to continue it more. That's one of the proud things. As I mentioned before, being selected to be a member of the Tennessee Bar Foundation, to me, was an honor which I thought then, and I still feel, is something that very few attorneys in Tennessee will ever make, because the foundation only takes in a certain number each year. I think it's maybe 25 or 30 lawyers each year. And the organization has grown some, but not that much, because many of the lawyers have passed away. So it hadn't leveled off, but it's still a very select group to be a member of. I'm very proud of my service on the Board of Ethics. I'm very proud of the fact that I received the one of the 5 professionalism awards given by the Sixth Circuit Court. The recognition by the U.S. Supreme Court. Supreme Court Judge Souter was very nice to me and my family while we were there in the courtroom and in the Great Hall with a banquet in the honor of those that had received that honor. So I've had experiences which some others haven't had, but many others have had that much and more.
On behalf of the Bar Foundation, thank you very much.
Thank you.